This is chapter 40 of The Night Singer. 40. Hannah took a detour to the Malcolm-Mosen rest area on her way home from the station. There were still a large number of flowers and candles in front of the wall where Joel had been slumped. Excuse me, but this time she was the only person here. Possibly because it was Friday and everyone else had better things to be doing, eating tacos or pizza with the family, settling down in front of the TV with a bag of chips or cheese puffs. It was 6:45 and the sun was dipping toward the horizon, but it would be another 2 hours before it set for good. Summer had always been Hannah's favorite time of year, more because of the light than the heat. You often had to be able to find shelter in order to enjoy the heat, and the flat island had few natural places to do that. But by the middle of June, the light triumphed for 16 hours a day. Samuel Hurgen's car still hadn't moved from the rest area, and they really needed to find him now. He was the only person registered at his address in Farston, but Hannah had managed to speak to his mother, who lived in Rolla. She claimed that he liked to go off-grid from time to time and that it wasn't usually cause for concern. Hannah had now given her reason to worry, without even mentioning the fact that his car was parked at the rest area where a boy had been found dead. The simple fact that the police were looking for her son was enough. The woman hadn't known that he had once been suspected of assault. According to her, he had never been violent. Hannah peered down at the ground where the rain had washed away the blood. Life went on, but it was hard to get a sense of that here. Joel belonged to the dead now, the people Hannah often visited, Mom, Dad, Esther, and Granny. Hannah often thought of her as dead because in essence she was. It was more than 5 years since she had last been able to have a proper conversation with her. In truth, her grandmother was stuck in some kind of transition zone. In the dusk, she had always loved talking about. Granny had been full of stories like the one about the nightingale that can sing evil away. Hannah had Googled it without much success. Maybe it was just something her grandmother had made up as a counter to all the dark stories she told. Hannah shuddered. She didn't want to be here as dusk fell. No nightingales would help her then. She dropped to her knees and pressed her palms to the damp stone of the wall. The rain had finally stopped, but it was probably only a temporary respite. What happened to you, Joel? So far, all they knew was that he had been beaten up in the woods behind Garby's school, that he had gotten up, waved a knife, and walked away. Probably heading home, given the bus shelter by the church was in that direction. They knew that Fanny had climbed back onto her moped, that she may have followed him. That at some point after 12:34 a.m. Joel had been stabbed, and that Axel Stanston's fingerprints were on the knife. Hannah desperately wanted to talk to Rebecca, but she couldn't, particularly not now that she had asked Ove and he had said no. Why had she asked? Another few minutes, Hannah returned to her car and drove home. She saw her neighbors gathered in their kitchen as she passed, and though it was only a fleeting glimpse, she imagined they were talking, laughing. She considered driving on toward Ingrid's house, but turned off at her own instead. Hannah slumped onto the sofa with her phone and brought up Rebecca's number. She wanted to fend off the feeling that had been lingering in her since they'd parted ways earlier today, that something between them had broken, but nothing she could say now would help. Eventually, she sent a message. Just so you know, we're not taking the weekend off. We're still working hard to solve this. The reply came a few seconds later. Thanks. I'm sorry for how I acted earlier. Don't be, Hannah wrote. I've seen worse. From me? That too. The 3 little dots showed that Rebecca was writing, but the seconds passed and her reply never came through. Was she angry? Hannah got up and made her way into the kitchen. Her phone buzzed. I hate Axel. He's got a sob story all about his grief in expressing, but he didn't care about Joel. He's just looking for sympathy. Hannah wanted to call Rebecca, but she couldn't do that without sharing what she knew. What an asshole, she wrote instead. After several minutes of waiting for a reply, she wrote that she was going to make dinner and promised to get in touch again tomorrow. Hannah had finished the last of the leftovers, so she cooked some pasta and heated a jar of store-bought tomato sauce instead, grating Parmesan over the top. She searched the cupboards for some black olives but couldn't find any. As she ate, she watched an episode of Outlander, a series about a British woman who goes on her honeymoon to Scotland in 1945 and is transported back in time to 1743. to a love far greater than anything she has ever experienced before. Hannah lapped up the woman's love as though it were enough to save her. The lush green hills of Scotland made her feel calm. She carried her empty plate over to the sink. The kitchen didn't have a dishwasher, but Hannah had no plans to get one. Yet again, the thought of going over to Ingrid's popped into her head, but she didn't have the energy for it today. No, she didn't feel like it. She was happy in her little house. Instead, she poured herself a glass of red wine and tried to read, giving up after just a few pages. Hannah was all alone, but she didn't feel particularly lonely, and though there were plenty of things that were troubling her about being here, she knew it had been the right decision to move back to the island. Hannah's phone started ringing, and she reached for the remote control to turn off the TV. She saw Christopher's number flash up on the phone's screen, and swallowed hard before she answered. "Hi," he said. That one word was all it took for her to hear that he was drunk, and she didn't speak, simply waited for him to go on. "I've been thinking about Axel since you called." Christopher took a sip of something. "He really was a bastard, ice cold. I saw him punch a guy once, and the guy lost his sight in one eye. Whatever you think Axel's done, he probably did." He practically sighed that last word. "Was the guy gay?" "Don't think so. Why?" "I can't get into it, sorry." The silence that followed was charged with Christopher's desire to hang up and keep drinking, but Hannah didn't want to let him go. Not yet. "How's the family?" "They're fine, I guess. Visiting Bethany's parents in Chalkcluster over the weekend." "You didn't want to go with them?" "I have to work." From his tone, Hannah suspected there was more to it than that. Or maybe it was just the booze. "Hotels, you know," he continued. "Listen," she said, because once she had started, she would have to follow through. "What?" "Everything with Dad. Do you ever wonder if it was like the police said?" "Why are you asking me that? Has something happened?" His voice was so cold he sounded almost sober. "No, it was the violence she wanted to talk about. All the injuries Esther Johnson had sustained." "You know what?" said Christopher. "I'm not interested. You'll have to keep obsessing over him on your own." But Christopher had already hung up. Hannah hugged the phone to her chest, sitting motionless for several minutes, until she felt a message come through, buzzing against her. She was sure it must be Christopher, apologizing for his behavior, but she didn't recognize the number. She opened the message. "You should have stayed away."